Hi guys, I'm Julianne, and in this video I'm going to show you how to sew the projects from our cut and sew fabric panel Magic World. The projects include this unicorn and its baby. We have this fairy that changes dress and hair color if you turn it. My personal favorite is this cute sun pillow. Then we have this pillow, pretty easy to sew, with a cloud pocket on this side where you can hide secrets. We also have this cute little butterfly that you can sew onto the pillow. We have this small pouch. I call it Make-A-Wish pouch because you can just write down little wishes and put it inside, maybe even put it here, and then maybe overnight the wish comes true, who knows. And then last but not least, we have a unicorn sleep mask. And I think everyone loves unicorn sleep mask, right? This one's really cute. All right, and I would say, let's get started.
Before we start sewing, here's a quick tip. I always begin with roughly cutting out all the pieces from my fabric panel. Once that's done, I cut each piece precisely along the dashed lines. Each piece on the panel is labeled with a letter. You'll find those little bubbles with the letters next to the dashed lines and also printed directly on the pieces themselves. That way, even after you've cut everything out, you can still easily identify which piece is which by looking at the letters mentioned in the printed instructions. Alright, let's start with our fairy FINA. For the fairy, you'll need these two pieces here. Before we begin sewing, I marked the beginning and end of the turning opening with a small incision. That way, I still see exactly where the opening is from the fabric's wrong side. Now place the front and back of the fairy right sides together. Make sure the marks for the turning opening line up on both pieces, as well as the top and bottom center marks. Then pin the pieces together all around the edges. Now we'll sew all the way around the fairy, but leave the turning opening unsewn. All our cut and sew panels already include 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so you can simply sew with the edge of your presser foot as a guide. Here's how my fairy looks now, all sewn together. You can see the opening here, which we'll use to turn her right side out in a moment. But before that, I'll trim the seam allowance. I like to use pinking shears for cotton fabrics like these, since they also help to prevent the fabric edges from fraying. If you don't have pinking shears, you can simply cut small triangles along the curves instead. This will help the edges shape nicely after turning. Once you've trimmed the seam allowance, you can turn the fairy right side out. Use your fingers to gently shape the seams and then press everything flat with an iron. Make sure the seam allowance at the turning opening is folded to the inside. Now it's time to stuff your fairy with fiber fill. Once she's filled, we'll close the opening by hand. I use a needle with matching sewing thread and stitch from the inside out, right along the folded edge of the opening. Then I go back in on the opposite side, again on the fold line. I repeat this step by step to create lots of tiny horizontal stitches between the two folds. After 1 or 2 inches, I pull the thread tight. And like magic, the stitches disappear. That's why this stitch is also called the ladder stitch or magic stitch. And that's it. Our fairy is finished and ready for cuddles. Next up is the pillow. Here are the pieces you'll need for it. The front and back pillow pieces, plus these 2 cloud pieces for the little pocket. Before sewing, I marked the beginning and end of the turning openings with small cuts. Alright, let's start with the cloud pocket. Take both cloud pieces and place them right sides together, aligning the top cloud-shaped edge. Then, pin them in place along that curved top edge. Now we can sew along the cloud-shaped edge. Here's how my cloud looks like after sewing. Before turning it right side out, we need to trim the seam allowances. I start by clipping the inner corners. Just make a little snip with your scissors straight into the corner, stopping right before the seam. If you skip this step, the corner won't turn out nicely later, but with that small clip it will shape beautifully. Once all inner corners are clipped, cut small triangles along the outer curves. This helps the seam allowance lie smoothly after turning, without creating any bumps. Now turn the cloud right side out. Shape the edges gently with your fingers and then press along the seam so it lies nice and flat. Next, we'll top stitch along the cloud edge. To do that, I pin the 2 fabric layers together with a few pins so nothing shifts. And then sew a straight stitch close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. This step is called top stitching, and it gives the cloud a neat finished look. Now that the cloud pocket is ready, we can attach it to the pillow front. The front piece is the one with the rainbow print. Place the cloud onto the pillow front so that the bottom and side edges line up perfectly with the pillow edges. Pin the cloud in place along the sides. Next, take the pillow back piece and place it right sides together on top of the front. The cloud pocket will now be sandwiched in between the 2 pillow layers. Make sure the marks for the turning opening line up on both pillow pieces. Pin everything together all around the edge. Now sew all the way around the pillow, leaving the turning opening unsewn. Here's my pillow all sewn together. Before turning it right side out, we'll trim the seam allowances at the corners. Just cut them diagonally, close to the seam, so the corners turn out nicely when turned. Now you can turn the pillow. Use a pointed object like the tip of your scissors to gently shape the corners. Finally, press the whole pillow flat with your iron. And now it's time to stuff the pillow with fiber fill through the turning opening. And to finish, hand sew the opening closed with a ladder stitch. And that's it! Your pillow with the cute little cloud pocket is all done. Next, we'll sew the cute little sun LALI. For this sun pillow, you'll need the front piece of the sun and these two pieces here for the back. On both back pieces, I start by marking the beginning and end of the turning opening with small cuts. Here are my two back pieces for the sun. We'll sew them together first along the straight edge. To do so, place them right sides together, pin along the straight edge, and make sure your turning openings line up exactly. Now sew along that line, but leave the opening unsewn. Here's how the back looks like once it's stitched. Before we go on, I press the seam allowance open so it lies nice and flat. Next, we'll join the front and the back of the sun. Place the back right sides together with the front so the seam on the back runs straight down through the middle of the sun's face. Then pin the layers together all the way around. Now sew once around the entire sun. When you get to a point or corner, stop with the needle down, lift the presser foot, turn your fabric, lower the foot again, and keep sewing. Do that at every tip. That's how you get those nice, crisp sun rays later. Before turning the sun right side out, trim your seam allowance. Clip into the inner corners, stopping just before the seam, and trim the outer tips diagonally. Since the rays are quite narrow, I also trim a bit closer to the seam so the points will turn out extra sharp. Once that's done, turn the sun right side out and use something pointy to push out the tips. Then give the whole piece a good press. Pin the front and back together in a few spots so the fabric doesn't shift, and then sew along the dotted dashed line all the way around that circle. If you have yellow thread, use it instead of a white one. The seam keeps the sun center separate from the rays, so when we stuff it, only the middle part gets filled. That gives the pillow a really nice shape. If you want, you can also top stitch along the outer edges of the rays at the same time. Here's how the finished sun looks like. Now stuff it through the opening on the back, and when you're happy with the shape, close the opening by hand with a ladder stitch. And that's it. Our bright and happy sun pillow LALI is finished. Next, we'll sew the unicorns. For this project, you'll need these two pieces for the large unicorn, Lady Lou, and these two smaller ones for the baby unicorn. Before sewing, I mark all turning openings with small notches. I start by placing the two fabric pieces for the big unicorn right sides together. Make sure that the notches for the turning opening match. And now I pin them together. I do the same for the baby unicorn. And now we can start stitching. Sew each unicorn all the way around, leaving the turning openings unsewn. If the curves on the small unicorn feel a bit tricky, here's a tip. Sew a few stitches at a time until you reach a tight spot. Then stop with the needle down in the fabric. Lift your presser foot, turn the fabric slightly, lower the foot again, and keep sewing. Repeat this step by step. That makes it much easier to handle narrow curves neatly. Once both unicorns are sewn, it's time to trim the seam allowances. Here's another quick tip. If you're using pinking shears like I am, skip trimming along the turning openings. That way, it'll be easier to close them later. Now you can turn both unicorns right side out. Use your fingers to gently shape the seams, then give both pieces a light press with the iron. Make sure to fold the seam allowance along the openings to the inside. Next, stuff both unicorns firmly with fiber fill until they feel nice and cuddly. And finally, close the turning openings by hand with a ladder stitch. And that's it! Your unicorns, Lady Lou and her baby, are finished and ready for magical adventures. Next, we'll sew the little Make-A-Wish pouch. For this project, you'll need these two pieces here. Just like before, mark the beginning and end of the turning opening with small notches. Now place the two pouch pieces right sides together and pin them all around the edges. Make sure the marks for the turning opening line up exactly. Then sew around the edge, leaving the opening unsewn. Here's how the pouch looks like after sewing. You can still see the opening here, but before we turn it, we'll trim the seam allowance. Cut diagonally across the corners, and along the curved edges I like to use pinking shears. They make the fabric turn more smoothly. Now turn the pouch right side out. Shape the seams gently with your fingers, then give the whole thing a good press. Make sure the seam allowance at the turning opening is folded in neatly. To close that opening, we'll top stitch all around the pouch. Pin the two fabric layers together with a few pins so nothing slips, and then sew close to the edge all the way around. Now, when you fold the fabric along this line, you can already see the little pocket shape forming, with this flap that folds over to close it. To actually keep it closed, we'll attach a snap fastener. You'll find two small printed circles among the yellow stars, one near the top flap and one below the rainbow. These are your placement marks for the snaps. I attached the top part of the snap on the flap first, and then the second part on the bottom section of the pouch. Once both parts are in place, check that the pouch opens and closes nicely. Now we can sew the side edges to finish forming the pocket. On the back of the fabric, you'll see two printed fold lines, one for the flap and one for the lower fold that creates the pocket. Fold the bottom edge up along that lower line and pin the side edges in place. Here's what it looks like now. And when you fold the flap down, you can already see the finished shape. To hold everything securely, sew a straight line right along the existing seam on both sides. That closes the sides neatly. Finally, press along the sides, the bottom fold and the flap. And that's it! Your Make-A-Wish pouch is all done. Next, we'll sew the butterfly. For this project, you need these 4 pieces, 2 in purple and 2 in pink. Before we start sewing, mark the beginning and end of each turning opening with a small incision. Alright, let's get started. We'll sew both the purple and the pink pieces right sides together. I start with the purple ones. Place the 2 pieces right sides together, line up the marks for the turning opening, and then pin around the edges. Do the same with the 2 pink pieces. Now sew around each set, leaving the turning openings unsewn. Once both pieces are stitched, trim the seam allowance. I like to use pinking shears for this. Leave a bit of extra seam allowance at the openings so it's easier to close them later. Now turn both pieces right side out. To shape the corners nicely, use something long and slightly pointed to push them out. Once both pieces are turned, fold the seam allowance at the openings to the inside and press everything flat. Then close the openings by hand with a ladder stitch. If you prefer, you can simply top stitch around the edges instead. And now we'll form the butterfly shape. Each piece will be folded like an accordion. Start with the pink one. First, fold it lengthwise down the middle, then fold each long edge back towards that center fold. First the bottom edge, then the top. You'll now have 2 folds that make the piece look like a little bow. Pin right through the center to hold that shape in place. Repeat the same folding with the purple piece and pin it on top of the pink one using the same pin in the middle. Now you can already see the butterfly taking shape. To secure it, we'll need a piece of cord about 10 inches long. You can also use yarn or ribbon, whatever you have on hand. Fold the cord in half to make a loop and place that loop behind the butterfly. Then bring both cord ends to the front, one on each side, and pull each end through the loop from back to front. Once both are through, pull the ends tight. This tightens the knot around the middle and holds the butterfly together. Now remove the pin and pull everything snug so the knot stays firm. Finally, trim the cord ends to the desired length so they look like antennae. And that's it! Your butterfly is finished. You can sew it onto a hair tie, decorate a bag with it, or even attach it to the pillow from earlier. It looks adorable anywhere. Finally, we'll sew the unicorn sleep mask. For this project, you'll need the front and back mask pieces, 4 ear pieces, and 2 horn pieces. Before we start sewing, mark the beginning and end of the turning opening on the back mask piece with a small incision. We'll begin with the smaller parts, the ears and the horn, which will later be sewn into the mask. Place the ear pieces right sides together and pin them in place. Do the same with the horn pieces. Now sew around the edges of the horn and both ears, leaving the straight bottom edge open on each piece. Then trim the seam allowance. Since all 3 pieces have pointed tips at the top, trim those corners down to a very small allowance so they turn out nicely. Along the rest of the seam, I like to use pinking shears to reduce bulk. Now turn the horn and ears right side out and use something pointy to gently push out the tips. Then press them flat with your iron. Here I have the front mask piece. That's the one with the letter O on it. Along the top edge, you'll see markings showing where to position the horn and ears. Pin them to the fabric according to those marks, with the open edges aligned exactly along the mask top edge. To keep everything from slipping later, sew them down within the seam allowance. You can simply stitch along the small printed line that shows the turning opening. This line sits inside the seam allowance, so the stitches won't be visible once the mask is finished. Now that the horn and ears are secured, we'll add the elastic band so the mask will stay on your head. Cut a piece of elastic about 12 inches long, but check the length first on the person who will wear it, just to make sure it fits comfortably. Pin the ends of the elastic to the side markings and again stitch them down inside the seam allowance with a simple straight stitch. That'll keep everything from shifting later. Once the elastic is attached, we can sew the front and back of the mask together. Place them right sides together, align all edges carefully, and pin around. There's a turning opening along the top near the horn. Make sure to leave that part open when sewing. Now sew all the way around the mask, skipping that small opening. Here's how it looks like once it's sewn together. Before turning it right side out, trim the seam allowance, especially around the curves, so the edges will lie smoothly. Then turn the mask right side out, shape the curves with your fingers, and give it a nice press. Be sure to fold the seam allowance of the turning opening inward. To close the opening, we'll top stitch all the way around the mask. Pin the layers together so they don't shift and sew around the entire mask. This will also close the opening neatly. And that's it, your unicorn sleep mask is finished. And with that, You've completed all the projects from our Magic World Cut and Sew fabric panel. I hope you enjoyed sewing all the projects from this Magic World Cut and Sew panel. If you did, give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more sewing fun. See you next time. Bye.